Welcome back. I'm in the studio with Prince Mashele, political analyst. We are here in Johannesburg, and in our Cape Town studios, Daniel Silke, political commentator, is also with us as we discuss what appears on the surface to be the DA implosion. I'm sure they will not agree with me, but rather say it was the breakdown of relationship between certain individuals within the party rather than the implosion of the organization. Daniel, let me start with you. Three ideas I'm putting to you. Is it the fallout between individuals, in other words, the emergence of Helen Zille as the leader that may have made Trollip, Mashaba, Maimane to leave, or is it the ideological differences that Prince Mashele spoke about here, or also the racial tensions within the organization that are leading to the problems that the new leadership of the DA has to contend with? Which one is which?
I think that's a tough question to answer. You know, my view is that there's small elements of each which are all part and parcel of the bigger mess that the DA has found itself in. But for me, ultimately, I think it really is about, I think there's a clash of personality. Many political parties have a clash of personality. And I suspect perhaps we shouldn't generalize all of the three resignations in the same category. There might be different reasons for them. I've already alluded to the fact that I think Mr. Mashaba perhaps was unhappy with the potential recalling of the EFF agreement in the city of Johannesburg, and that could have, I think, upset him. And I think in the case of Mr. Trollip, it's very possible that he felt as though there were differences between him and Mrs. Zille, and that it was time for him to, on the basis of her re-emergence, remove himself from the scene. So I think that for each of the three, there might well have been different reasons, and rather just sort of painting the whole picture with a brush of racial tensions, it's more a cumulative series of events that have their own genesis for each of the three, but are predicated to me in the underperformance, and I would say hapless performance, of the DA on so many levels over the course of the last 2 to 3 years. The management of various crises in local government, the Patricia de Lille saga, the indecision on policy in particular, and I might add the inability to translate the DA's philosophy, liberal, social democratic, social market, call it what you will, into a country that was becoming increasingly polarized on issues of race. I think that also played a part. And may I just say, there's another reason why I think the DA has found itself in a position of tension. It's because the DA simply couldn't deal with the issues of a resurgent Cyril Ramaphosa vis-a-vis the previous Jacob Zuma, firstly. And secondly, the DA was beaten in terms of being an opposition party by a rising EFF. And if you had to plot the decline of the DA, it's on the basis of the rise of Ramaphosa and on the rise of the EFF. Put all of those factors together, and I think you get a few of the many reasons why the three left. Let's not just generalize to me about the broader reason why they've left.
Well, let me stay with you for a moment. One would have thought that the fact that the DA is in charge of the council in Joburg and in Tshwane mattered somewhat to the party, because it will influence the fortunes of the DA going forward. That's I suppose, an average person in Gauteng would think like, right? And there was a possibility of the same happening in Nelson Mandela Bay. So what the public, at least in Gauteng, would want to know is, why would the DA compromise the leadership it has in charge of Joburg and Tshwane, and a leadership that seems to be relatively popular with the potential supporters of the DA?
Look, the review panel spoke about the agreement with the EFF as being a strategic error. I think those are the words that they used in that report. And I think that the apparent contradictions of a DA working with the EFF, I think, were assumed to have been part of the reason why some of those 450,000 white supporters found it increasingly unpalatable to side with the DA. And again, it goes to coalition building. You can have a coalition for the coalition's sake, but you really should have a coalition with relatively like-minded political parties. And I think there is an argument, certainly within the DA, that the EFF perhaps were seen to be getting the better of the DA when it came to the nuts and bolts of the administration in Johannesburg, certainly perhaps to a lesser extent in Tshwane. These factors, I think, have all played the part here. But I think, and let me just say, I agree with the sort of the tone of what you're saying. The loss of Mr. Mashaba, the potential loss for the DA of governing the city of Johannesburg, albeit in these very difficult circumstances, I think is a very serious jolt to the DA's aspirations at local government level. It's going to put them on the back foot for the next 16 months as we move to the 2021 local government elections. And for a party that wanted to exert its influence in local government in particular, this is the worst possible timing to have a fallout in terms of governance of a major city like Johannesburg. The optics, certainly of the Johannesburg story, along with the rest, I might add, but the optics have been particularly disastrous for the DA at a local government level, and it's a battle. It's a battle royal now to claw back any semblance of support that they've managed to achieve, particularly in their newer target markets. The existing suburbs may remain relatively loyal, but not enthusiastically so. But it's going to be a tough battle for the DA to recoup some of those essentially black middle class votes that the party should have gone for in the last number of years. It found it difficult. Now it's going to find it extremely difficult, if not nearly impossible. It's certainly in the short term.
That's why I say, the potential DA support as a result of what was happening in Joburg and Tshwane. Your comments, Prince Mashele, about this.
But here's the thing, and I've read the preview report. I don't agree with them, by the way, that the whatever deal between the DA and the EFF in local government in Tshwane, Johannesburg was a strategic mistake. Look at what these governments have been doing, and you tell me what was strategically wrong about that. Let's focus on Johannesburg. Mashaba has been implementing a pro-poor agenda. And what are the elements of this pro-poor agenda? It's insourcing. So he found there a group of black workers who were working for tenderpreneurs who had been appointed by the ANC. These workers were underpaid. They were actually paid slave wage. What did he do under a DA government? He said, no, let's discontinue this. Let's appoint these people, double their salaries, give them benefits. What is strategically erroneous about that? Absolutely none. Two, he went across the city distributing toilets to black people who did not have toilets. Tell me what is strategically erroneous about that. It's giving people dignity. There is no single policy issue that Mashaba implemented in Johannesburg, by the way, that I could call strategically erroneous. At an ideological level, at a national level, maybe there are serious differences, but there's absolutely nothing at the level of governance in Johannesburg and Tshwane that could lead a rational human being to say that was wrong. The question here is this: does the rich sympathize with the poor? So if you say you want voters from black people who are poor, you must give them something. So you give them toilets, you give them jobs, proper jobs. Then a component of the DA that is white leaves the party.
Well, I just want to pick up on this very briefly from your side, because you've written about it somehow, and you keep referring to race as a factor, or racism as an issue from your observation. I want to go back to the Mmusi Maimane story. You think in recent times that there's been a plot afoot to undermine him, that ultimately there was a stitch-up of sorts that was being put together to get rid of Mmusi Maimane, and you think it was inspired by racism or more than anything?
There's no question about it. Let's retrace the steps. After the elections, there was a Federal Council meeting, a very heated one, by the way. I got information from people who attended as to what happened there. And race was a big factor in that discussion. Now, then a decision is taken to appoint a review panel. I mean, think of it, team. We're living in South Africa. We're not living in some homogeneous society somewhere. That review team is composed of three white males, right, to decide the fate of a black leader, right? And it comes with the kinds of recommendations that it has come up with. You will have to be blind not to see race in it. Number three, Helen Zille goes to join the Institute of Race Relations, right, for a few months. When she is there, articles are fired calling for Mmusi Maimane to resign. right, by the race relations with another white institution. You have to be blind not to see it again. Fast forward, she then leaves the IRR to go back and say, I want to stabilize the DA. All of that suggests to me that race is a factor. We live in South Africa.
Well, I want to move things a bit forward now and look at the political situation in South Africa. Is there anything that's going on beyond the DA, looking at the EFF, looking at the ANC, that suggests realignment of politics, or that there will be a fallout within the different organizations going forward, and that South Africans must somehow prepare themselves for a different future to the current political scenario that we find in the country? What's your view, Daniel?
Well, I've always believed that, we are relatively ripe for a political realignment. I think all the major political parties, and if you move away from the DA just for a moment, there are certainly areas of great fracture within the ANC, whether it's personality-driven, whether it's ideologically driven, whether it's patronage-based driven as well. Even the EFF are showing signs of tension within their organization as well. I think the demands of South Africa, the rather perilous economic state that we find ourselves in as well, the very high levels of social unease and distress, and the very high levels of unemployment in particular, really do show up the major political parties as not being able to deal with the situation. The practical experience of the life of millions of South Africans really hasn't improved, and we've seen poverty levels increase again in South Africa. So I think there is certainly a disquiet within the electorate. All the political parties, in a sense, are not really performing. They're not really changing the game on the ground within South Africa.
Sure.
And under those circumstances, I think the country is ripe for a realignment. But a realignment can't just come from the offshoots and resignations of a moderately sized opposition party like the DA. A realignment really of any meaningful, anything meaningful has to come certainly from within the ranks of the ANC.
All right,
well.
Daniel, thanks very much for that. And what's your take, Prince? What kind of political future do you think South Africa is facing in? Any potential fallout, breakdown within the other political parties, or realignment of politics? Where are we headed to, very briefly?
Here's the thing. For 25 years, the ANC has failed to address the economic question in South Africa as far as it relates to the upliftment of the black majority. There's no question about it. If you look at unemployment, if you look at all indicators, you can see that the ANC has failed. Now, in my view, in the next 10 years or so, in fact 10 years is a long time, the ANC is going to split. Once the only glue that is holding the ANC now is the credibility of Cyril Ramaphosa. The Jacob Zuma faction is still alive, and the leader of that is Ace Magashula, who sits at the center of Luthula House. So the factional battles in the ANC will see, and the ANC will break apart. The DA will become a smaller white party, in the main consolidating its control of the Western Cape. The EFF could possibly break up depending on the fallout between Malema and Floyd Shivambu. If that were to happen, the EFF would possibly break out. There is a need for a new party in South Africa that can unite both whites and blacks. But that party must not just be about faces. It must be about a real plan that can change the lives of poor people in South Africa.
Thank you very much, Prince Mashele and Daniel Silke, for having been my guests. I appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
And after the break, we will be discussing the pensions and the monies that are due to some of the pension holders. You may not be aware of this, but we'll tell you more about it in a short while.